Hello, welcome back. This is Chris Herrera here. Let's dig into Bittersweet. Bittersweet is really cool. It's by Flux and it's free. Download it, install it, get going with some transient design. I want to start here because two reasons. One, it's free. Two, I think this really highlights what transient designers are capable of if you use them correctly. So, the idea here is you've got this big knob here. If you crank the bitter, your transients are going to get stronger and harder and more intense. If you go with the sweet, it's going to roll off the transient and soften sounds and sit them in your mix nicer. Perhaps a backup singer came in too hard with a T or a P or something like that, and you want to roll that off as to not fight with the lead vocal. Getting rid of the transient via the sweet control is a really good way to go. So the way that I'm going to highlight this is I'm going to show you a couple different examples, real world examples of different types of sounds that you might end up using in your mix. So here it is on what would be a drum bus of analog drums. And here it is on what would be a drum bus of, say, an electronic groove. And then I've got it set up here to highlight individual sounds. So for instance, a kick, a clap. Well, let's not exactly call that a clap. I would say that that's maybe more of like a top endy percussion, something that you would perhaps layer with a clap, and then a shaker. Okay, so let's get right into it here. Let me preface this by saying a couple different things. First of all, none of this is mixed, okay? So I'm throwing these things in here extremely raw, meaning no EQ cleanup, no additive or color EQ, no saturators, no bus sends to reverbs, nothing fancy that personally I think would go into tuning the sound in the first place. I just want to go in extremely raw with all of these sounds to really highlight what this transient designer can do to a given input or source material. Number two, let me get this out of the way early. I do not necessarily suggest using transient designers on bus sums, meaning if you have 10 tracks in a drum mix and they're all sent to a single bus, I don't personally really suggest using transient designers on a bus. Suffice it to say that remember, you're painting with a broad stroke here, meaning that any transient design you do is going to affect every drum in the mix. So again, if you have 10 drums in a drum mix, when you put a transient designer on the bus, that transient designer is going to affect all 10 drums. I want to be very upfront about this. And again, this is just total opinion. There were people that would absolutely disagree with this, but I have to share with you that my personal opinion is to avoid using transient designers on buses or on full mixes. That said, I suggest using them as transient design elements on individual sounds or one shots. For instance, that example I made of a vocal that has a hard P or has a hard T and it's supposed to be a backup. Eliminating that T or P is a really good example of using a transient designer to roll off aggressive transients. Conversely, say something's a little bit weak, you like the tone, it's a good sound, but it just needs that extra bite. Use that again as a design tool on individual sounds or one shots. That's just a little bit of taste and philosophy there. Take it or leave it. Many people would disagree with me on that, but in my opinion, definitely one shots are the better candidate for transient design, and bus sums or complicated elements involving many sounds, perhaps not the best idea. But we're just going to get an idea of what the voice of these plugins can do. So here's Bittersweet. Let me just give you a little example of what it's going to do to this more analog style. In this case, kind of a jazzy shuffle style drum beat. So let me start off with this link button because as you can see, it goes from this fast, medium, slow, all the way this line through the big knob and then down to the link. And the link dips into this input output gain. The cool thing about this plugin is that it actually has a built-in attenuator or booster. It'll fix your levels as you adjust. So now that I have the link on, notice when I pound heavier into the bitter, it's going to adjust the output gain a little bit by bringing it down. Cool, right? So as you can see, as I crank the bitter, it's bringing down the overall level because obviously as you're adding transient, it can begin to spike and clip and give you problems in terms of just gain staging and overall mix levels. Now, conversely, right? You can hear it most noticeably, I would say, in the kick drum on the suite, where the kick drum becomes more tame. Everything becomes more tame because it's rolling off the transient attacks of every slice in the loop. Now, again, these are not perhaps the results that you're going to go for overall because using this on a loop that in this case has a kick, a snare, a hat, everything, what's good for the goose ain't good for the gander. So, as much as I want to make an example of what this thing can do, I want to again encourage you not to necessarily expect the best results with a wide brush, with a big brush. This to me is much more of a fine tune device on a given one shot. So the link button right here will adjust, as you can see, your gain staging. So if your spikes get too hot, it's going to bring it down a little bit. If things get too rolled off in terms of taming transients, it's going to boost it up so it feels a little bit louder.